This isn't going to be your typical manosphere video where, I say like, oh, well, the reason that dating is so difficult for men now is because women have become promiscuous hoes. And if we just go back to the 1950s, the glory days, everything would be great. And none of us would have any problems. And there'd be no incels. Men would be men, women would be women. I'm not going to take that frame. First of all, that's just like what everybody says. There's some truth to that a little bit, and I'll cover that, of course. But what I want to talk about here is there's two major issues, two major reasons, I should say, that dating has become very difficult for men. Some of them, sometimes it's talked about, sometimes not really. And then more importantly, I want to offer a solution at the end. So rather than just sit here and complain about how dating is so difficult now, just to appeal to a wider audience, because a lot of guys are struggling, I actually want to offer a real solution. Okay, so stick around to the end for that. The problem with modern dating is twofold. All right, so one, and this might seem kind of obvious to some of you, but less to others, is the material circumstances. Women naturally, and this is my theory of greatness versus wellness. I talk about this in other videos, but basically, men have this self-overcoming instinct, which is why Nietzsche is like such a masculine philosopher. A lot of men gravitate toward Nietzsche, where they want to overcome things, become better, strive for greatness, right? It's almost like an irrational drive where you want to be part of something great, even if it means at the expense of yourself, of sacrificing yourself. That's what war is. That's why so many men went and fought and died for an ideology, but more specifically, just for their country and their country's pride in World War One. And families sent their sons off to their deaths to do that, because that's striving for greatness. All right. Now, for women, on the other hand, that's just you tell most women that. Like, a lot of guys will kind of understand that. They might push back against it a little bit, but they'll kind of understand how a guy could have that sort of passion to be willing to actually die for it and sacrifice himself for it, right? Women, on the other hand, they can't even imagine that at all. Of course, they're willing to sacrifice probably themselves for their family, but not for just an idea, right? And so with them, I think the more driving instinct is what I call wellness, the self-preservative instinct, something that Nietzsche admonished in men and humanity as a whole, by the way. But I think there's a lot of utility in it within women. And so if we're not in the right environments where men are striving for greatness and women are secure in uh, in the society that they're in, and in the modern day with the capitalistic society, typically it's to be secure financially, right? There's going to be a whole lot of weird stuff going on, sugar daddying, women dating men that are much older than them. Um, yeah. So I don't think that's like an epidemic. I feel like that's always existed. It's not like modern women all of a sudden became gold diggers. It's just that it was a very important thing that women needed from men that was a lot easier to attain, um, especially the boomer years. So right after World War II, and then obviously historically before that. But that was when America was at its height, financially, culturally, spiritually, whatever, because we had just came out on top of the greatest war ever fought in World War II. Like I said before, wanting to be financially secure and having a family, a nice life, a life of wellness, a life of comfort, that's not the same as being a gold digger. That's more about having like minimum needs met. And women have that self-preservative instinct more. That's why they're so selective with men. That's why they're scared of men, especially even like men they're attracted to. And that's why their trust levels are much lower, because the consequences of them striving for greatness in any given domain is that they're the physically weaker sex, right? Um, and the consequences of choosing a bad partner means pregnancy. Unwanted pregnancy means ostracization from a tribe, right? It's very like deep Evo psych type stuff. And so if they're not able to have those needs met, then they're going to seek those needs elsewhere, or they're also just going to shut down. Or like they'll start to find that comfort and security in having to work themselves, right? And so like there's so many women in the workforce than there were before, and they're way unhappier. Just statistically, that seems to be the case, that they're less happy than they were when they weren't working and they were tending the household, right? And what with men, on the other hand, when we're not working, we're more miserable because we're not striving for greatness. All right. So that's just laying the foundation there. All the stuff that I talked about right there isn't just something that's completely revolutionary. I'm sure you probably heard that's some sort of sentiment in one way or another, from another YouTuber, another book, podcast, or whatever. Right. This second part, I think, is going to be a bit more, people don't talk about, and this is the rise of technology, more specifically social media and internet porn. There's something about men and just human beings as a whole that where mystery excites us. All right. And so for a very long time, the mystery of a woman, of what she is, what she looks like without her clothes off, like what's having sex with her would be like, what being in love with her would be like, was just like the most fascinating thing in the world for men. And I don't think that that's really the case anymore, because with the media that we consume, psychologically, we get that reward through seeing all the best things you could possibly ever see from a woman, sexually at least, from pornography. It's easy to see uh, fairly normal looking girls like dressing all skimpily and whatnot on social media. This is a very, very new phenomenon, a very new thing. And, women will say that it's very empowering, or some women will say that it's very empowering for them, without realizing that that is actually decreasing the interest that men have in them. If I were to give you, let's say this, man. Okay. So if I were to give you like $100 a day for the rest of your life, um, put aside inflation and all that type of stuff. Let's just assume that inflation wasn't a real thing. Let's just say I give you $100 a day for the rest of your life, right? So that's $3,000 a month. That's not like a ton of money, but it's enough money to live off of. And more importantly, you don't have to work or do anything, right? If I was to give you $100 a day for the rest of your life, would you be motivated to work? No, because most people, they need to work, because if they don't work, they're going to go broke. They're going to, you know, have lower status. You're going to be like the broke dude with no job, right? You're you're just going to spiral downward and not have anything to look forward to. So human beings are the types of creatures where we're constantly running away from fear and pain and towards some sort of pleasure. All right. So if the pleasure is already there, even though it's not like the greatest pleasure ever, as long as the pain is not there, you're going to remain stagnant. You're not going to go after something that's really good, right? So let's say that this is the ultimate pleasure, which is having a successful, great, meaningful life. And then this is the ultimate pain of like being an embarrassed, low status dude that has nothing going on in their lives. And then I offer you this right in the middle, which is that $100 a day for the rest of your life. 99.99% of people will take that, right? But it comes at the expense of actually living a great, meaningful life. There's this quote where the enemy of the best is the good. I'd even say the enemy of the good is the mediocre. I'd go so far to say that. And so, how does this relate over to men and women in the dating context? Well, porn compared to like the real thing is just good enough. It's not as good. It's not high status or anything. But whenever you're going out to, risk your neck with asking out women or doing what it takes to become attractive to women, especially when nowadays it's much tougher than it used to be, because like I said before, point number one, the material circumstances are much more difficult for guys to uh, be able to provide for women, and women want a bare necessity of being able to be taken care of, and then because of that, they have to go work themselves, right? And a lot of um, problems between men and women tend to be financial. So that's the main leading cause of divorce. Um, so anyway, because of all those things, it's much more difficult for men to become an attractive guy as opposed to how it was back in the day. It's easier to just sort of check out and be like, well, I have my porn. I make enough just for myself, not enough for a family. I can just watch my porn, get that gratification there. It's not the same thing as like actually dating women. It's not as good as that, but that's really difficult. And this is just good enough. And so it's a mix of these two factors. There's other factors at play too that contribute to why dating has become so difficult because one, the material circumstances are obviously make it much more difficult. But on top of that, too, there's sort of like this out that makes it a lot easier. Where, especially if you know your chances of achieving this are very low and a lot more difficult. It's kind of like if you've watched the show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire way back in the day, where when they get to a certain amount of money that they've made after they've answered a certain amount of questions, they're allowed to leave after I think like $32,000 or something like that. So imagine if you see that almost everybody who goes beyond the $32,000 mark has failed to try to reach that $1,000,000 in the show, then naturally you're going to be like, yeah, I'm just going to take my $32,000 and dip out of here. Because if you go beyond the $32,000, you don't accept it, then I'm pretty sure you go back to zero or you go back to a very small amount of money in that show. And so that's sort of the rational calculation that a lot of guys do. And that's why they sort of give up, right? Because they have something that's not quite zero, but it's something. Again, the enemy of the best is the good. The enemy of the good is the mediocre, right? If this is a good life, and this is a bad life, a mediocre life is here. Just doing enough to sustain yourself, you know, getting that sexual gratification or whatever from pornography, and yeah, and that's it. That's just enough. And the issue is this middle part can become very addicting, right? It's something that I've been through myself. It's it's an addiction just like any other drug. And typically you're using that addiction to um, shield yourself away from some other aspect of your life that you don't want to take care of. You know what I mean? And again, it's weird because this addiction itself is just a very crude simulation of the real thing. And this crude simulation actually also carries over to making you not appreciate or wonder about the real thing as much. Our ability to wonder and the have mystery about life has been taken from us, um, in the form of our relationships with women, which is a very deep central part of what it means to be a man, right? It's kind of like if you go to a movie theater and somebody spoils the ending for you, or or instead of watching new movies, once you've watched a movie, you're forced to rewatch the same movie over and over again. Like, your intrigue or your mystery or excitement for that movie is going to decrease every time because you're so used to seeing that. You know what I mean? Um, so yeah, I hope this video made sense. It's a very complicated issue, obviously, but typically when people talk about this topic, they either take one or two stances. They either take a stance of "it's all your fault, do self improvement, bro. What's wrong with you?" Or they say it's not your fault at all, and it's all society's fault and the culture's fault. And like most things, the answer is a bit more nuanced than that. It's a mix of both. Um, you need to understand that the circumstances now are different and why they are different. And then also what makes it difficult for men to do the work necessary to uh, do the more difficult thing, right? Because people would have a point if it was on an individual basis. But when you're talking about large populations and you see these macro trends and these declines, then at that point it's less about blaming the individual and really trying to see, okay, what circumstances in our environment is causing this to happen. you know it's an easier take for me to have as somebody who doesn't really believe in free will. And I think, as a side note, I talked about this in other videos, but the idea of free will can actually be a very evil idea, because that's the very thing that tells most guys that if they're struggling in dating, it's their fault, without considering other factors that, if they were put in uh, a different time period under different circumstances, then they would succeed and they would be fine. So this leads me to the last part that I promised at the beginning of the video: the solution. The solution is not dating apps. I'm actually pretty against dating apps now, even though I've personally found a lot of success from it. I just kind of got lucky. I don't look very good right now on purpose. I'm kind of going like monk mode. Yeah, somebody said I look like Chewbacca on my comment section. I thought it was hilarious. But I'm in a relationship now. I don't really have to try my best to look good. So, uh, I mean, because I'm not trying to attract new females, you know. So anyway, where was I going with that? Oh yeah. So I used to be successful in dating apps. But again, I haven't been on a dating app in well over a year now. And so anyway, that's not the solution because it only rewards a small minority of guys. I think the thing that you have to do, and this is what I've done personally, even though luckily I'm somebody who didn't struggle too much with dating. The reason I did struggle is because I got addicted to porn, and so I was less motivated to go out and meet women. Which something like NoFap, by the way, helped cure tremendously. Um, but I think the solution is to find areas that aren't decadent and aren't on a decline, where the women aren't struggling to make ends meet, and but they do want like a bare minimum of being taken care of. Because this is one. It's very important not to be resentful, just in general. But um, I see a lot of men being very resentful of women in the West, and I can't I don't think that's good because you can't blame them, right? It's in their nature to want to be taken care of, to want to have basic needs met. And if they're not able to get those needs met based off of the material circumstances of that society, of course they're going to act different. Of course they're going to act, not as feminine or whatever because they have to start working more masculine jobs, right? In order to sustain themselves. So if you go to different societies around the world where women, the sort of those that cultural role is still there of like the man provides for the woman, right? Um, and it's not a society that's like on the decline. And they could actually be even pretty poor countries too, like countries that I've go to frequently, like Vietnam. Vietnam, a, it's not a rich country by any means. But the women aren't gold diggers there. I mean, for the most part, you can find gold diggers anywhere. Typically, they just want, there's a lot of family values there. They just want people, they want to have a husband, they want to have kids. Um, they want to just live a nice life where they're able to just spend time with their family. It's not a coincidence that Vietnam was so drawn toward communism because if you just look at how people act with each other there, it's so family oriented, so community oriented, you know. Um, so that's besides the point. And besides whether communism actually works or not, the ideals of communism preach that, right? And so those types of things are still possible, man. They are. This is different from the passport bro advice of like, oh, you can't get laid in the US, then go try to become a pimp in these third world countries. That's not the advice that I'm giving. I mean, if that's something that you want to do, fine. It's more difficult than you think. Um, because typically the passport girls, whatever you want to call them, they actually are just gold diggers, right? But these very same countries, um, they also have the types of women uh, who just want to fit that sort of wifely role. And most guys really just want a girlfriend, let's be honest. They're just using being promiscuous or trying to be promiscuous in a pimp as a cope. Um, and so another thing too is that it's a lot cheaper and easier to live out there. Like, dude, I live in Vietnam and I can easily live off of less than $1,000 a month over there. Easily. So that means, yeah, like if my girlfriend and I get married one day, I could definitely provide for the whole family, no problem. But with what I do, with the types of stuff because I basically work online full time, um, that's really difficult to do in the US and then build towards something unless I'm making like six figures, in order for you to even qualify for a home nowadays with the average home price, uh, your yearly income has to be at least like 120 grand a year or something like that, and even then that's not a good investment considering how everything's going on in the US. It's an empire that's on the decline. And then when you see empires on the decline, the way that the women act, the way that the men act, it can start to become predictable. But on top of that, we have that whole porn and social media issue that compound these things and make those things even worse. All right. And so it's not like these other countries are all perfect and don't have any of these problems, but it's way less. At the very least, your dollar goes way further when you're out there, and you have women who don't have to, or don't feel like they have to live more masculine lives, striving for greatness through working 40, 50, 60-hour work weeks. Um, and instead they can just, you know, be taken care of by their man. Hey, if that makes you a simp, it makes you a simp, I guess. But at least you're happy, and the guys calling you simps are can continue to be miserable living back in the West. Well, anyway, that's the video for the day. I'm going to get back to writing my book. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.